Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into something I think pretty much everyone is feeling right now.
Oh, absolutely. This feeling of pressure.
Exactly. We're taking that stack of sources you all shared with us, and they all seem to circle around this one central thing, this constant weight. And what we want to do is really explore why. Why does it feel so much heavier now than it, maybe did in the past?
And that's really our mission here, isn't it? This isn't about solutions. It's an analytical deep dive. We're here to just unpack this feeling
Right.
where these, daily obligations feel so disproportionately heavy. And the key, I think, the thing we really have to focus on is this cognitive mechanism, distance.
Distance.
Yeah, how distance naturally shifts that weight. So we're asking why it feels so intense up close and how perspective changes that. But, and this is key, without ever giving advice.
No prescriptive advice. We're not here to solve it. It's more of a thought experiment.
Exactly. We're just naming a shared human experience.
I like that. A shared thought experiment. And we're going to try and articulate this heavy feeling, maybe find where it lives in our routines, and then really look at the sort of physics of how we perceive it.
The physics of perception. I love that.
Because if we can understand that just by, zooming out, gaining a bit of altitude, the actual weight of the problem changes, well, that understanding just by itself is pretty profound.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with this first big observation that just jumps out from the sources. This idea that everyday pressure now feels constant.
It's relentless.
It's relentless. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not just that it's intense sometimes, it's that it's always there. If you think about, I don't know, stress from a generation ago, it felt more episodic.
Right. It was an event, a crisis, a big deadline, something with a clear start and a clear end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now it's less like a series of crises and more like this permanent background hum, like a high-frequency vibration you can always feel. That is such a critical distinction. The shift from, peak stress to a constant baseline pressure. Because when stress is a defined event, there's a recovery period.
There's a valley after the peak.
There's a valley. You push, you finish, and then you can collapse, you can rest. But if the pressure is constant, as all our sources are suggesting, that valley just never comes.
It never arrives.
It's always there, humming away, in the periphery. And the cost of that is, it's subtle, but it is so profound.
It sounds like living in a perpetual state of low-grade alert. Your system is just always running a scan for what's next. Which brings up this really important question from the sources. Is this constant pressure actually new, or is it just that our awareness of it has been amplified?
I think it's so hard to separate the two.
Me too. Because the technology, our digital connection, that seems to be the thing that's fundamentally different. If every channel is always on, then the potential for demand is always on too.
And that's an amplification fueled by design.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a known psychological thing, the Zeigarnik effect, right? Your brain processes an open, unresolved task very differently than a finished one.
It just sits there taking up space.
It sits there. So now just consider a world where the potential for a new demand, an email, a notification, a message you have to decide on, is always active. Because your phone is right there.
Right.
Your brain can't ever truly switch off that monitoring function. So you might not be actively stressing about some huge project, but you're paying this huge neurological price for what they call continuous partial attention.
Continuous partial attention.
Wow, it's just this constant state of readiness for the next thing. And that state of readiness is the constant pressure. And it's deeply, deeply draining.
So that hum we were talking about, it's not just noise, it's the literal cost of keeping all these mental tabs open, just waiting for a ping.
Yes.
You're burning energy just being prepared for the work before you've even started it.
That's it. That's the whole game.
And this state, this continuous alert, it creates what the sources are calling a scale distortion, which I find fascinating.
Me too.
It's this question of why these tiny, almost trivial things, checking a box on a list, answering a text, clearing a notification, why do they suddenly feel so urgent?
Like they're mini deadlines.
Exactly. They have a weight that is just wildly out of proportion to their actual consequence.
And that distortion, it's almost a direct mathematical result of the sheer density of input we're facing.
You mean just the number of things coming at us?
The number of things and the cognitive fatigue that comes from it. So, when one of the sources asks that question, does it feel like everything wants attention at once?
The answer is just a resounding yes.
It's a resounding yes, because you have, 20, 30 items all competing for this very, very limited cognitive bandwidth. And your brain, especially your fast, intuitive system 1, it just it can't prioritize anymore.
It loses the ability to distinguish what actually matters long term.
It does, because that requires the slower, more deliberate system too. And it's too tired for that.
So what does it do instead? It just defaults to a simpler way of sorting the queue.
Precisely. It defaults to prioritizing based on one of two things: proximity or loudness.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Proximity is just what's physically closest. The flashing icon on your screen, the phone vibrating on your desk, it's the most available target. And loudness is about an immediate emotional or social demand, a message from your boss, or something that feels awkward if you don't reply right away.
Ah, okay. That makes so much sense. So the small tasks feel urgent simply because they're right there and they're manageable.
Yes, and manageable is key.
You can clear a small task and you get that little hit of dopamine, that feeling of completion. But it's actually just a distraction, isn't it?
It is. It's a system-one sense of relief that pulls you away from the big, consequential things that require deep focus. The urgency isn't real. It's just a byproduct of cognitive overload.
You're just trying to manage the anxiety of the queue itself.
And this is where we have to talk about what they call cognitive switching costs.
The tax you pay for changing tasks.
It's a tax. Every single time you pivot from a big project to answer that quick email or clear that notification, your brain pays a price. It takes real effort to disengage and then re-engage.
So if you do that 20 or 30 times an hour.
The cumulative tax is enormous. The energy you spend just sorting and switching contexts can be way more than the energy needed for the tasks themselves. And that's why small things feel urgent, because of the cost they inflict on the whole system.
This connects back to that core distinction in the sources, right? Is the pressure real, like truly consequence-driven, or is it just pressure that feels closer? That's perception-driven.
That is the core insight.
And I'm starting to think that most of what we feel day to day is the second kind. It's proximity-driven. The really big stuff is often stable but kind of distant. It's the immediate, noisy stuff that feels overwhelming.
I think you're right. I mean, if a task has a genuine heavy consequence, you're going to lose a major client. You'll miss a regulatory deadline that can help you strategize, but it won't make the consequence go away. That's real pressure.
Of course.
But if a task feels heavy because it's just one of 50 things pinging you at the same time, then the weight is almost entirely perception-driven.
So in that case?
In that case, simply increasing the distance, delaying the response, deciding to batch process all your small emails at 4 p.m., that can radically reduce the felt weight, because the urgency was never really in the task. It was just in the notification.
And all of this, the constant alert, the switching costs, this proximity thing, it all adds up. It culminates in what I think is the most universal feeling described in the sources.
I know which one you mean.
This pervasive sense of always feeling slightly behind.
Yes. Always on the back foot.
Always.
Yeah.
And it's such a profound comment on, the modern math of input versus output. To feel like you're constantly behind means that no matter how productive you are, you could be having your most efficient day ever.
And the input stream is still just mathematically outpacing you. It's an arms race you can't win because the demands are generating faster than your capacity to meet them.
The goalpost isn't just moving, it's actively running away from you. And it's so important to state this isn't about being lazy or inefficient.
No, not at all.
We're talking about the simple mathematics of a world with infinite incoming information. You finish one thing and 3 more appear. The idea of being caught up it's a mirage.
It's an unattainable state. There's always going to be some cognitive residue. And that's where the load becomes so burdensome, because the brain just hates open loops.
So the sources are just asking us to name this, to just recognize this collective experience.
Exactly. If this feeling of being behind has become separated from actual failure, if you're still hitting your big deadlines, you're achieving your goals, then the feeling isn't about your performance. It's a function of managing the system.
The feeling just exists because the sheer volume of input guarantees there will always be a list of things you haven't done yet.
Yes. And that creates that low-grade anxiety, that guilt of never being finished.
So really, we're just recognizing that this feeling, this constant small deficit, is the baseline state when our capacity is finite and the input is functionally infinite. It's not a personal failing.
It's a systemic feature.
A systemic feature. I like that. The weight comes from trying to fight a battle against volume that you can't actually win.
And the really subtle, tyrannical thing about it is that it discourages deep work. If you know you're always behind, you're less likely to commit to that single huge important task that needs hours of focus.
Because every minute you spend on that, the pile of small, noisy things you're ignoring just gets bigger and bigger.
Right. And that just reinforces the cycle of focusing on small, quick wins, which brings us right back to that paradox of feeling busy all the time.
Okay, so we've kind of named the abstract feeling. Let's ground it now. Let's talk about where this pressure actually lands in our daily lives, in our routines.
Yeah, where does it manifest?
The sources talk about pressure creeping into normal routines. It's not just at your desk anymore, it's in the moments in between.
It's the stacking effect. We need to look at how messages, tasks, and decisions are stacking up in very specific, observable moments.
And it's a temporal stacking, not just a list. It happens in these tiny moments that used to be downtime.
Exactly. The transition times.
Let's think of some examples, like walking from your car to your front door, or the 30 seconds between two Zoom meetings, even just waiting at a red light.
Before, those were empty spaces. Mental white space.
Right. Your brain could just it could process things in the background. But now, those 60 seconds are immediately colonized. You pull out your phone.
Instant.
And suddenly, that tiny gap is filled with 3 urgent emails, a decision you have to make, a reminder about something you forgot. The pressure doesn't just stack. It condenses. It crams itself into these tiny routine gaps.
It's the total eradication of zero-input moments. And that is a huge source of the weight. Routines used to give us natural breathers.
They gave us structure.
A structure for decompression.
Yeah.
The commute, waiting for the coffee to brew, standing in line, these were passive moments. Now they're active input periods.
So the stacking just accelerates because we've removed all the shock absorbers from the system.
We have. The pressure isn't contained in work hours anymore. It's spread across the entire day, and it's most intense in those little moments where we instinctively reach for a device to avoid being bored for 10 seconds.
So the problem isn't just the number of tasks. It's the number of tasks we're shoving into moments that used to be reserved for nothing. The pressure has no escape valve.
And that leads directly to this paradox of busyness that the sources hit on so well.
Oh, this one resonates. The feeling of being busy without knowing why. You spend so much energy, you feel completely wiped out at the end of the day, but then you look back and you can't name 3 big substantial things you actually got done.
It's such a classic sign of a system that's just overwhelmed by volume. And the sources suggest this feeling comes from spending all your energy managing the flow of inputs.
Rather than actually tackling a few big tasks.
Exactly. Yeah. Most of your effort goes into administrative sorting, clearing the email queue, responding to little demands, just keeping the information moving, not deep creation or real problem solving.
That's a great analogy I read somewhere. It's the difference between being the traffic cop who makes sure 1,000 cars get through an intersection,
right,
and being the engineer who spends months building one single bridge. The traffic cop is incredibly busy, totally exhausted by all the constant small decisions. But at the end of the day, the traffic pattern is the same. The output is just management.
It's management, not creation. And managing volume is so exhausting because the goalposts are always moving.
But why does the effort feel so high when the tangible output feels so low?
I think a lot of it is what's called attention residue. When you switch from task A to check a quick email, task B, your brain doesn't just snap back cleanly to A.
A part of it stays stuck on the email.
A piece of it does. A residue of your attention is still thinking about the context of B. So if you do that 50 times in an hour, you're never fully present for anything. Your work quality suffers, your speed suffers. The feeling of busyness becomes a measure of how much input you're absorbing and how much friction you're creating, not how much progress you're making.
So we feel busy not because the work is hard, but because we can't fully disengage from the constant stream of small things.
Yes. The pressure is in the processing rate and the friction of switching. The busyness is just a symptom of an overloaded system running inefficiently.
So let's try to locate this feeling even more specifically. The sources ask this very personal question. What parts of the day feel the tightest? And does it feel more physical or mental?
For a lot of people, the mental pressure really concentrates into decision fatigue, and not the big life-changing decisions.
No, the little ones.
The constant stream of tiny ones. Should I answer this now? Do I work on X or Y first? Which of these 3 options is fine? Just that rapid-fire erosion of your ability to make good choices is immensely draining.
And what about physically? Where does it show up?
Physically, it's rarely just feeling tired. It's tension. It's the jaw clenching, the shoulders creeping up towards your ears, that tightness in your stomach. It's a constant low-level physical state of being braced for the next thing.
And if we think about when during the day it feels tightest, those transition moments just stand out so
The
clearly.
boundaries of the day.
Exactly. The start of the day is tight because you're facing that initial inertia, plus the giant wall of everything that's stacked up overnight.
You're facing the full inventory of the deficit all at once.
And the end of the day is just as tight, if not tighter. You're trying to disengage, to switch off, but that feeling of being behind means you're leaving a mountain of unfinished work.
And that friction between the need for rest and the knowledge of that giant to-do list creates so much tension in the evening. That's why people have trouble sleeping, or just doom scroll through work emails when they know they should be resting.
What's so interesting about those transition points, morning, evening, even just moving between tasks, is that the pressure might not actually be highest then.
Right. It's that our awareness of it is highest.
Yes, when you're in the middle of deep, focused work, you can kind of block it out, you're concentrating. But the second you pause, the moment you stand up or check the clock, the full weight of everything you're not doing just rushes back in.
It's like the pressure is most palpable when you stop doing the thing you think is supposed to fix it. When we're busy, we're distracted from the weight. When we pause, we're forced to look at it. And the observation itself is what feels tight.
The pressure gauge only becomes visible when you take your eye off the road for a second.
Beautifully put.
Yes. Okay, so we've established the weight, we've located it. Now let's pivot to the really elegant part of this. The cognitive tool the sources talk about for reducing this weight, and that is simply distance.
Yes. This is the core thesis.
Perspective reduces weight, and not by solving the problem, it just changes how intense it feels.
This is where we shift from sort of descriptive psychology to the actual mechanics of it. The weight of this pressure, especially the kind that's driven by proximity, is so dependent on how close we let ourselves get.
Right.
When a problem is right up in your face, it triggers what they call hot cognition. It's emotional, it's overwhelming, all the little details are sharp and clear, and the immediate impact feels total.
It's the boulder on the path right in front of you. It takes up your entire field of view.
Exactly. You can't see around it.
Yeah.
If you're standing nose to nose with a deadline, all you can see are the painful details of getting it done. But if you could just, take a helicopter up 1,000 feet.
Suddenly that project is just one small part of the landscape of your entire career, your life.
The problem itself hasn't changed its mass, but its perceived size, its threat level, has just plummeted. Because you've traded proximity for context.
And that visceral shift is the mechanic we're trying to understand here.
It is. When you gain distance, whether it's time or just psychological space, you lose that emotional charge. The brain can shift from focusing on the micro details of execution, like the urgent need to answer that one email, to the macro view evaluation. Is this even important?
So it's not denial, it's just recognizing that the feeling of being overwhelmed is a function of how close you're standing to the problem.
It's a function of proximity, not necessarily of inherent size or consequence. Distance is like a filter. It lets the noise fade out so the signal, the actual importance, can become clear.
And this connects so perfectly to that other idea from the sources that time softens urgency. We all know this is true when we look back. We laugh at things that made us frantic 6 months ago.
We do.
But the question is why? Why is time such a powerful softener? When we look back, what is it that actually matters less?
Almost always, the thing that matters less is the immediacy that felt so critical at the time. The demand for an instant answer, the exact moment something was delivered, the perfect wording on the first try.
All of that just fades away.
It fades away. Time lets the true lasting consequence emerge. And for most of these small, noisy pressures, the lasting consequence is basically zero. The urgency was only tied to the deadline, not the outcome.
I'm thinking about the immense stress over some minor report that was due at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. 6 months later, you don't even remember the report existed.
Let alone the panic it caused. The pressure was all about the clock ticking down, which triggers our internal alarm system. It had nothing to do with the report's actual cosmic significance. We invested everything in the immediacy of it.
So what's the psychological mechanism there? What's happening in the brain?
Well, it's a shift from the limbic system's immediate threat response, the fight or flight feeling you get from a tight deadline, to the prefrontal cortex's more rational long-term valuation.
From system 1 to system 2?
Exactly. The limbic system just reacts.
Wow.
It floods you with urgency. But when you introduce distance, even just by walking away for an hour or sleeping on it, the brain has to switch gears. It's forced to move from reactive execution to strategic valuation.
It's like you're just waiting for the emotional smoke to clear.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And once it does, the prefrontal cortex can finally ask the real question, what is the actual damage if this is 1 hour late?
And the answer is almost always none.
Almost always none. And that's when you realize how disproportionate your emotional investment was. Time just confirms that you survived the tiny delay and the world kept spinning.
This all leads to a really critical reflection on our default mode, which is to just push through.
Right, brute force.
Our whole culture tells us to just lean in, work harder. So why does stepping back actually help more than pushing through, especially when the pressure feels most intense?
Because pushing through is an action strategy. It's great for things that just require pure execution or stamina. But the pressures we're talking about here, the overwhelm, the distortion, these are perceptual problems.
They're problems of perspective, not a lack of effort.
Precisely. If you're feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of things, pouring more effort into task A just means that tasks B, C, and D are piling up even faster behind you. You're guaranteed to stay behind.
Right. So stepping back, it's about the quality of the insight you gain from that space. When you step back, you're giving yourself a wider field of view. You're getting some altitude.
You're shifting from being the worker, the executor, to being the system manager, the evaluator. And that space lets the internal pressure just dissipate for a moment. And that enables a shift in your view that might let you redefine the problem. Or even better, identify tasks you can just delete.
Proximity locks you into what you call execution mode.
It does. You're just focused on doing. But distance unlocks evaluation mode. And if your core problem is being overwhelmed by volume, pushing through is just overwhelming yourself faster. That leads to burnout and bad decisions.
So stepping back is a strategic retreat. It's not giving up.
It's a strategic retreat to gain a tactical advantage. You're recognizing that sometimes more effort is actually counterproductive. If you're trying to read a map by holding it an inch from your face, squinting harder isn't going to help.
You have to step back to make it legible again.
That's the only way.
Let's go deeper into this idea of reframing, which is different from fixing. The sources say not everything needs to be solved immediately, which I have to say feels like a pretty radical idea today.
It's a huge challenge to the modern professional mandate, isn't it? We operate under this unspoken rule that every single incoming message or problem requires an instant response.
We've conflated being responsive with being competent.
We have. And it's created this high-pressure cooker where any kind of delay feels like you're failing. And that expectation is a massive source of the pressure we all feel.
So what does it mean then to let an issue breathe, to just let it sit for a while instead of forcing an outcome?
It means recognizing that when we force an immediate answer, we are almost always working with incomplete information, under high emotional stress, and with limited cognitive capacity from all that task switching.
And so the solution we come up with is probably not going to be our best work.
It almost never is. By choosing what we could call strategic delay, just not solving it right now, we allow the context of the problem to settle. Maybe the piece of information you need arrives 30 minutes later. Maybe the problem fixes itself.
So it's an act of confidence. It's trusting that time can be a resource, not just an enemy.
Yes, it's allowing other variables to shift before you commit your own very finite resources. It's recognizing that the pressure to solve something right now is often just your own internal anxiety, not an actual requirement of the task.
And that deliberate pause leads to this other beautiful idea from the sources. Clarity often arrives later.
Oh, this is so true.
We've all had this experience. You're wrestling with a problem, you're getting nowhere, so you finally give up, you go for a walk, you go to sleep.
And suddenly, out of nowhere, the answer just pops into your head, often perfectly formed.
Why does that happen?
It's a textbook example of subconscious processing. When you're actively struggling with something, your conscious, focused brain, your system 2, is often just stuck in a loop, trying the same failed strategies over and over again.
It's great for execution, but it's bad at finding new connections.
Exactly. So when you step away, when you rest, that focused part of your brain quiets down. And that allows what's called the default mode network to activate. That's a part of your brain that synthesizes information, makes novel connections.
It connects the dots in the background.
It connects the dots. The solution didn't appear by magic. It's just that the cognitive tool you needed, the ability to see how A and D and Q all fit together, could only turn on when the pressure of immediate execution was lifted.
So pausing literally changes your perception. The problem is the same, but your ability to see it clearly has expanded.
Yes. Rest isn't just about recovery. It's an essential part of strategic problem solving. In a high-pressure world, it might be the highest leverage thing you can do.
Okay, let's just spend a moment on this core concept. Why does space help more than effort sometimes?
I think it's so important to really land this. This is not about being lazy. It's about recognizing that some pressures are what we might call perceptual traps.
Perceptual traps.
Yeah, you can't dismantle them with more effort. You can only escape them with a change in perspective. If your pressure is coming from the sheer volume of things competing for your attention, working harder on item number 1 does nothing to reduce the cognitive load of items 2 through 20.
Effort addresses the task. Space addresses the system.
Beautiful. Yes. If the pressure is on how you're seeing things, that false sense of urgency, then more effort can actually make it worse. Forcing yourself to finish a small, urgent task just reinforces the idea that small things should be treated as urgent.
Whereas if you introduce space, if you say, I'll do all these little things at 4 p.m., you give the urgency a chance to naturally deflate.
Because the urgency was only an illusion created by the immediate moment. Space is what you need for calibration, for reframing. Effort is linear. It moves you along a known path. Space is dimensional. It gives you altitude. It gives you breadth.
And when you're dealing with something complex, like the density of modern life, you need to find the leverage point. And you can't find that with your nose pressed against the screen.
You can't. You're stuck in tunnel vision. You need room to gain the altitude to see the whole landscape. When the problem is overwhelming proximity, the solution can't be more action.
The solution has to be less proximity.
A deliberate act of cognitive displacement.
So this brings us to the synthesis, right? The outcome of all this is what the sources call breathing room. And that's not just a nice idea. It's a palpable physical feeling.
It's a visceral feeling of relief. It happens the moment the perceived threat level drops. And you get there through bigger picture thinking.
But not in a vague philosophical way.
No, as a deliberate, systematic cognitive act. You are consciously overriding the immediate, detailed, emotionally hot view with the wide-angle, low-emotion, long-term view.
And there's a huge difference, I think, between just intellectually knowing that, saying to yourself, I know this one email isn't the end of the world,
Right.
and actually feeling it. That visceral experience of relief the moment your shoulders literally drop, because your brain has truly integrated that long-term context.
The intellectual note fails because your limbic system is still screaming threat. The visceral relief only happens when you've actually achieved distance. And that feeling is the signal that your prefrontal cortex has successfully overruled the alarm system.
And it's freed up all the cognitive resources that were tied up in that anxiety.
Yes. And that reduction of resource strain is the feeling of breathing room. The world outside is just as fast, but your internal response to it has been recalibrated to match the actual threat, not the perceived one.
So we arrive at this final core idea. Perspective is relief. It's not something you go out and find. It's a natural consequence of zooming out.
It has to be. If proximity causes distortion in weight, then distance, by the same physics of perception, has to cause decompression and a reduction of that weight.
The sources have these wonderful reflective questions for the listener, like, what helps you zoom out when things feel tight? What reminds you that this moment isn't the whole story?
And those questions just point to the fact that we all have these intuitive ways of creating distance. Going outside for 5 minutes, thinking about what will matter in a year, doing something totally unrelated to the stress.
The relief isn't in the activity itself. It's in the psychological space the activity creates.
It's the space that matters. And the relief is often so immediate because the pressure was mostly perceptual to begin with. If it felt heavy because you were holding it too close to your face, simply extending your arms makes it feel lighter. The mass hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has.
That's it. That immediate feeling of relief is the confirmation. You've successfully traded that high-stress proximity for clarifying context.
So this has been our deep dive into the physics of this feeling. We've named the pressure, we've tracked it through our routines, and we've really examined the mechanics of why distance brings relief.
We've stayed purely in reflection and analysis. No solutions, just observations on how our minds perceive this weight.
And we can end with this open thought, that sometimes distance is the answer. That perspective doesn't just manage the weight, it actually changes the very nature of the weight itself, and the implications of that. We leave entirely with you.
So here's something for you to mull over. If the tyranny of urgency really depends on this illusion of immediate critical consequence, what one simple, non-effortful act of displacement could you introduce today that might fundamentally alter the felt weight of whatever pressure is closest to you?
I think just acknowledging the depth of this feeling and
Huh.
naming these complex shared experiences,
Yeah.
sometimes that alone is the most powerful shift of all.
This was the deep dive, exploring your source material on the current weight of everyday pressure. We'll see you next time.